I was halfway down the main road into Dunford County when I saw it. Rows of half-built townhouses rising above the horizon like skeletal monuments to human arrogance. My heart clenched so hard I thought I might pull over, but I kept driving, dread coursing through my veins. This land was supposed to be farmland, my grandfather's legacy, the place my parents had poured their entire lives into, yet now it looked more like an overambitious construction site. Cranes pivoting, bulldozers rolling across flattened earth, newly paved roads shining under the midday sun. At that moment, I realized something drastic had happened while I'd been away, and it turned my stomach inside out. I'm Graham Linton to the townsfolk who know me personally. I'm the last surviving son of the Linton family, owners of Willow Grove Farm for 3 generations. To people in the state capital, however, I'm something else altogether. One of the youngest state land commissioners in recent memory, a role that grants me significant authority over land use and environmental policies. But no one in Dunford, besides my immediate family, seemed fully aware of my new position. I'd kept it low profile partly out of a desire for privacy and partly because I was so busy juggling my responsibilities. I assumed the farm was safe because we'd never even put it up for sale. So to see these 50 or so townhouses sprouting up on my own family land like invasive weeds nearly made me slam on the brakes. Instead, I kept going, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Memories flooded in. Grandpa showing me how to plant soybeans, my mother teaching me how to care for goats in the old barn, my father, rest his soul, always telling me that land was sacred and that we had a duty to protect it. The old farmhouse had stood on this land for over a century, and now, in a matter of months, someone had carved out roads, laid foundations, and erected an entire block of multi-story units. Who had the nerve to do this without my family's consent? How was that even possible? I parked on the shoulder near a sign that read Pleasant View Homeowners Association, future site of townhouse community. The sign was glossy, emblazoned with a stylized logo of a sun rising over generic-looking houses. I stared at the bold letters. Pleasant for whom? My father's orchard used to run right through this patch of land they'd just obliterated. My mind roiled with questions. Had my mother sold? No, she'd never do that. Perhaps someone forged papers? Or maybe some cunning developer leveraged a corrupt official to push through a rezoning? Whatever the cause, my gut told me something was seriously amiss. I stepped out onto the dusty gravel, the midday sun punishingly hot overhead. Construction noise droned in the distance. A few workers in orange vests ambled back and forth, ignoring me. The entire scene felt surreal. Half-constructed frames dominating what was once the largest soybean field in Dunford County. I made my way toward the site's makeshift office trailer, ignoring the suspicious stares from passing laborers. My heart thundered with a mix of rage and dread. If my family's farm had been stolen, I would tear down heaven and earth to set things right. Inside the trailer, I found a woman in her 40s with immaculate hair flipping through a stack of documents. She wore a pencil skirt and blazer, a phone wedged between her ear and shoulder. She barely glanced at me, finishing her call with an exasperated sigh. When she finally looked up, she pasted on a plastic smile. "Sorry, we're closed to visitors today," she said, her tone brisk. "If you're interested in purchasing a townhouse, you can schedule an appointment next week. Or check our website for virtual tours." Her eyes flickered across my dusty jeans and rumpled shirt, betraying mild disdain. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "I'm not here to buy," I said evenly. "I'm here because this is my family's land, or at least it was until your bulldozers tore it up. I need an explanation." Her eyes narrowed, the forced warmth in her smile vanishing. "Your family's land? We have the legal deeds for every parcel in this development. If you have a dispute, you can speak to the Pleasant View HOA board." I stared her down. "That's exactly who I'd like to speak to, right now." She set down her paperwork, lifted her chin. "I'm the HOA president, Madison Pierce. I handle operations here, and as far as I'm aware, this land was sold by the previous owners months ago. If that's not you, I suggest you verify your records at the county clerk's office. Now, If you'll excuse me, I have a project to oversee. She made to pick up her phone again, effectively dismissing me. An explosion of anger welled in my chest. There's no way we sold this land, I said, voice trembling with barely contained fury. My mother still lives in the old farmhouse on the other side of that ridge. She never signed any contract. This entire operation is unauthorized. I want an immediate halt to construction. Ms. Pierce exhaled with annoyance, as though talking to a misguided child. I'm sorry for your confusion, but we have valid documents. You can't just walk in and tell us to stop. Now please. Our attorneys can sort this out if you file a complaint. Otherwise, I have work to do. The condescension in her tone lit a fire within me. I forced myself out of the trailer before I said or did something reckless. Storming back to my truck, I dialed my mother's cell phone. She picked up after a few rings, sounding breathless. Graham? I didn't expect you back in town so soon, she said warmly. My mind spun, but I tried to keep calm. Mom, I'm standing in the middle of a giant construction site on our property. Did you sign anything giving these people permission? There was a shocked silence, then a stammer. No, of course not. Why would I? I've been receiving odd letters from some HOA about expansions, but I threw them out. I thought it was a scam or a mistake. My blood ran cold. Well, it's real. They're building townhouses. I'm going to the county clerk's office right now to see what the hell is going on. She mumbled something about coming along, but I told her to stay put. This might get ugly, and I didn't want her stressed. I'll update you soon, I promised, then hung up. Within 15 minutes, I was inside the county building. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I explained the situation to a bored-looking clerk. He tapped at his keyboard, looked up property records, then frowned. It looks like the farm's deed was transferred to a development corporation about 3 months ago, he said slowly, scanning the screen. It's all official, signed by one Ms. Linton. That's your mother's name, right? My pulse hammered. She never signed anything, I growled. Let me see it. He printed out a document thick with legal jargon, culminating in what appeared to be my mother's shaky signature at the bottom, but something about the scrawl felt off, like an amateur trace job of her handwriting. This can't be real, I murmured, cheeks flushing. The clerk shrugged helplessly. If it's forged, you'll need a lawyer and a formal complaint, but as of now, it's on file as legitimate. A swirling rage and panic seized me. Someone had forged my mother's signature, stolen our land, and brokered a deal with Pleasant View HOA. And they had the nerve to construct 50 townhouses on it in record time, likely hoping to finish before anyone noticed. My frustration mixed with a grim sense of determination. They had no idea who they were messing with. Sure, I was a small-town boy from a farming family, but I was also the newly appointed state land commissioner, with the authority to scrutinize land deals, enforce environmental regulations, and investigate corruption. The fact that Ms. Pierce had brushed me off so casually would come back to haunt her. I marched back to my truck, heart pounding. My phone buzzed, a text from a contact at the state capitol reminding me about a meeting next week regarding farmland preservation. The irony was almost too much to bear. I typed a quick reply, then started the engine, thoughts racing. My first step, consult with my old friend and lawyer Robert Garland, who specialized in land disputes. The second step, quietly gather evidence about how this scheme had come to pass. If local officials were complicit, or if shady money had changed hands, I'd expose it. My gut told me Ms. Pierce was the tip of the iceberg. She might have some local bureaucrats in her pocket. That evening I reached out to Robert over the phone. Hey man, I said, voice quivering with anger I barely kept in check. We've got a massive problem. The family farm, it's apparently been sold without our knowledge. There's a forged signature on the deed. He let out a low whistle. Damn, that's bold. Usually scammers go after smaller parcels. The entire farm must have cost millions on paper. Who'd even attempt such a stunt? I explained the situation with the Pleasant View HOA, the 50 townhouses, and the suspicious timeline. I need your help to prove the documents are forged, then shut this project down. Meanwhile, I want to keep my position as state land commissioner under wraps until the right moment. I want to see how these people react when they think I'm just a powerless landowner. Robert chuckled darkly. Oh, they're going to regret messing with you. I'll start by filing a complaint for deed fraud first thing tomorrow. The days that followed felt like a feverish scramble. Robert and I pored over county records, discovering that the developer Clearway Partners had purchased not just our farm, but a few smaller parcels around town, all allegedly signed by owners who later denied any knowledge of a sale. We suspected Miss Pierce and her HOA might be fronting for a more extensive real estate scam. They'd swoop in, build as fast as possible, and sell units to unsuspecting buyers. By the time the rightful owners realized what was happening, the HOA could claim good faith and bury them in legal fees. A classic con, if they'd forged enough official documents and bribed the right notaries. Meanwhile, construction continued unabated, with trucks hauling in materials and half-constructed townhouse units sprouting like mushrooms after rain. My mother stood at the edge of the property line one afternoon, tears in her eyes as she watched them pave over the old orchard site. "It's everything your father worked for," she whispered, voice shaky. "And they're just destroying it without a care." I put an arm around her shoulders, my rage simmering beneath a calm exterior. "Don't worry, Mom. We'll put a stop to this. They have no idea who they're dealing with." She gave me a watery smile, though heartbreak lingered in her gaze. Within a week, Robert had filed the initial complaint, alleging deed forgery and demanding a cease and desist order on all construction. The local judge scheduled a preliminary hearing, but not for another 2 weeks. Time enough for the HOA to rush even more building. Desperate, I decided it was time to leverage my position as state land commissioner. I'd originally wanted to keep it quiet to see how the HOA reacted, but they were building so fast that irreparable damage might be done before the court hearing. So I placed a call to the state capitol, speaking with one of my top aides, Natalie Reyes. "Natalie, I need all the documentation on farmland preservation laws, zoning regulations, and potential environmental impact statements. There's a major violation happening in Dunford County, and I suspect local officials are looking the other way." She sounded concerned but professional. "Absolutely, Commissioner Linton. I'll compile everything and get it to you by tomorrow." That same day, I stepped into the Dunford County Municipal Building, official badge in hand. The clerk, who'd shrugged at me before, nearly fell out of his seat when he recognized the state seal. "You're state land commissioner?" he stammered. I just nodded curtly. "I need to see the county zoning officer right now." The man scrambled to comply. Moments later, I found myself seated across from a pale, sweaty official named Todd Marshall. He fiddled with his glasses nervously, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Commissioner," he greeted me, forcing a smile. "What can I do for you?" I wasted no time. "Explain to me how Pleasant View HOA acquired permits to build 50 townhouses on the Linton family farm," I demanded, leaning forward. Todd's expression flickered with panic. It's all in the system. They had official deed transfers and the zoning was adjusted after a public hearing. Maybe you missed the notices." He rummaged through a stack of papers, hands trembling. I pressed him. "My mother never sold that land, so the deed is likely forged. And you think a public hearing is valid if the rightful owners were never informed? That alone is illegal. As state land commissioner, I have authority to request an immediate review of all records. If you're found complicit in forging approvals, you'll face criminal charges." Todd's face turned chalk white. He stuttered something about how Mr. Pierce had provided all the necessary documents. She said the Lintons were behind on taxes, that they needed to offload the land quickly. I had no reason to suspect fraud. My jaw tightened. "Well, you have reason now," I snapped. "Prepare everything. I want to see every piece of paper that authorized this project, and I want it by the end of the day." I left Todd trembling in his office. The tension in my shoulders only mounted as I realized how deep this scheme might run. Ms. Pierce must have woven a tapestry of lies claiming we'd parted with the land. Perhaps she'd paid certain officials under the table to expedite zoning changes or skip crucial notification steps. There was no way this entire operation could have progressed so fast otherwise. That night, Robert called me with an update. "I got word from a contact that Ms. Pierce's personal finances are suspiciously robust. She's made large cash deposits that don't align with her HOA salary. Also, The notary who supposedly signed off on your mother's deed left the county 2 years ago." My stomach lurched. "We're dealing with a nest of corruption," I muttered. "And they thought they could hide. But that ends now." Buoyed by official state authority, I had the power to freeze further development if there was evidence of environmental or procedural violations. Over the next few days, my aide Natalie emailed me a trove of documents referencing farmland preservation acts, water usage restrictions, and zoning laws. I pored over them, cross-referencing the local records Todd grudgingly handed over. It became painfully clear the entire townhouse project was built on a house of cards. False signatures, backdated memos, and questionable permit stamps. The community hearing that supposedly greenlit the development was a sham, with minutes typed up but never referencing the Lintons. Ms. Pierce had gambled on the fact that no one would challenge her if she built quickly enough. Armed with this evidence, Robert and I requested an emergency injunction from a state judge, bypassing the slower local process. The judge, intrigued by the scale of the alleged fraud, agreed to review it the following week. I told my mother the good news, though she still looked haunted every time she saw the half-finished row houses creeping closer to our old barn. "They even put up a big sign advertising an outdoor pool," she whispered, shaking her head. "A pool on farmland, your father would have been appalled." I hugged her gently. "Don't worry, this project won't last long." A day before the state hearing, Ms. Pierce showed up at the farm in a sleek black SUV, accompanied by a tall, sharp-suited attorney. I was out by the orchard stump, overseeing a small group of volunteers trying to salvage some of the old fruit trees. When she approached, I tensed, but decided to hear her out. She cleared her throat, eyes scanning the orchard remnants. "Mr. Linton, my condolences for the confusion. We'd like to offer a settlement." Her attorney nodded solemnly. "Yes, we're prepared to pay a significant sum to you and your mother if you'll withdraw these legal actions. Also, you could keep a portion of the farm, maybe on the western boundary." Her tone implied she thought she was being generous. I almost laughed at the audacity. I folded my arms. "You bulldozed my family's farmland for profit, forging my mother's signature, and you think you can buy your way out?" Ms. Pierce maintained her composure, but her eyes flashed with desperation. "It's not like that. We had a legitimate belief the sale was lawful. We don't want to see the project die. There are buyers waiting. The county needs more housing." She forced a polite smile. "And you? Well, you can walk away with a healthy compensation." I glared at her. "I'm the state land commissioner. You forged official documents to steal farmland. I guarantee you, this project will die, and if I find enough evidence of criminal activity, you might face charges. So, no, you can't buy me off. Get off my land." Her attorney started to protest, but Ms. Pierce grabbed his arm, shooting me a livid look. They stomped back to the SUV, dust swirling as they sped away. The following day, tension crackled through the small courtroom in the state capitol. On one side, Ms. Pierce and her legal team. On the other, me and Robert, supported by reams of evidence about the fraudulent deed, the questionable permits, and the farmland protection laws. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 50s, meticulously reviewed each item. Ms. Pierce's attorneys insisted they'd acted in good faith, that all the official documents pointed to a legitimate sale, and that the Lintons must have neglected to respond to notices. Robert countered with the notary's departure date, the suspicious deposit records, the contradictory timeline in county documents, and of course, my mother's sworn statement that she never signed anything. The judge's stern gaze flicked to Miss Pierce as Robert hammered home the possibility that local officials were bribed, given Todd's contradictory approval. Miss Pierce's face drained of color. After a tense hour, the judge announced she needed time to deliberate. We awaited her decision in a side chamber, feeling the weight of the entire farm on our shoulders. My mother, too nervous to attend, paced at home, waiting for my call. Miss Pierce and her attorneys huddled at the far end of the hall, whispering in urgent tones. She occasionally glared in my direction, as though I were the cause of all her problems, when in fact she'd orchestrated this fiasco. Another half hour passed. Then a bailiff summoned us back in. The judge's face was unreadable as she delivered her verdict. Based on the evidence presented, particularly the suspect notary signature, contradictory county records, and the sworn statement from Mrs. Linton, I find substantial reason to believe that the property transfer was unlawfully executed. Therefore, I'm issuing a temporary injunction on all construction activities at Pleasant View's townhouse project. Furthermore, the matter will proceed to a full trial to ascertain the extent of fraud. Until then, the Lintons retain all rights to the land in question, and the HOA must cease and desist. Relief coursed through me so intensely I almost sank into my chair. Miss Pierce's expression hardened into fury, but she was powerless to resist the judge's order. The attorneys on her side bowed their heads in resignation. We'd won the initial battle, but the war was far from over. Even so, the judge's ruling meant we could halt construction, preserve what was left of the farm, and dig deeper into the corruption beneath the surface. That evening, I found my mother on the farmhouse porch. She was gazing across the field where half-finished townhouses now loomed like a bizarre, alien presence. I relayed the good news. She gripped my arm, tears glimmering. "Your father would be so proud of you," she whispered. I swallowed hard, thinking of Dad's voice telling me as a kid, "Always fight for the land. It has no voice but ours." The next day, the site lay eerily still. Workers had been told to pack up or risk violating a court order. Ms. Pierce's trailer remained locked, the windows dark, the giant sign proclaiming "Future Site of Townhouse Community" looked pathetic next to the deserted frames. Over the following weeks, Robert and I compiled further evidence, including testimony from neighbors who said they'd never seen any official posting about a rezone hearing. The bribery angle gained traction when Todd, the county official, confessed that Ms. Pierce had approached him with promises of development contributions in exchange for fast-tracking approvals. The local press caught wind and soon headlines blazed. "HOA accused of fraud. Townhouse project in legal limbo." Miss Pierce was spotted a few times around town, always rushing to her SUV with a scowl, refusing to speak to reporters. One afternoon, I received a phone call from the mayor of Dunford County, a man named Victor Hansen. He tried to sound congenial, but I sensed desperation in his tone. "Commissioner Linton," he greeted me. "I heard about the farmland dispute. The town is in dire need of new housing, you know. We can't let one misunderstanding ruin an entire project that might benefit many families. Perhaps we can compromise?" I gritted my teeth at the veiled pressure. Compromise on what? On forgery? On stealing farmland? I'm not negotiating away my family's land or letting Miss Pierce skate free. If the town truly needs housing, it can be done legitimately on land that's actually for sale, not by forging my mother's signature. Hansen exhaled. "Now hold on. We don't condone forgery, but maybe a financial settlement." I cut him off. "No. The farm stays with us. Let Miss Pierce build her condo somewhere else if she can find a legal site." I hung up, rage boiling. It seemed half the local establishment wanted to sweep this under the rug. Yet my position gave me the upper hand. Everyone knew the state land commissioner outranked any local official when it came to land policy. So while Miss Pierce might bribe or intimidate some county folks, she couldn't do that at the state level without catastrophic risk. Slowly but surely, the pressure built. The final straw came when Robert discovered emails linking Ms. Pierce to the developer Clearway Partners, referencing excess funds allocated for facilitating county compliance. We forwarded them to the state prosecutor, who opened a criminal investigation. Ms. Pierce's world was collapsing. Sure enough, a month after the injunction, Ms. Pierce's attorney reached out to Robert, requesting a meeting. I expected more attempts at hush money, but by then, the noose was tightening. My mother and I joined Robert in our lawyer's downtown office. Miss Pierce arrived, looking haggard, flanked by two stone-faced attorneys. She tried to open with pleasantries, but I shut that down. "Get to the point," I said icily. She sighed, rubbing her temple. "We're prepared to revert ownership of the farm to your family. We'll dismantle the partially built townhouses. We'll pay restitution for the damage done to your land. In return, we want you to withdraw the fraud charges." Robert and I exchanged a glance. He replied calmly, "We don't control the criminal investigation. That's the state prosecutor's domain. But if you fully restore the farmland and compensate the Lintons, we can let them know you cooperated." Ms. Pierce's face hardened, but she nodded. "Fine, we just need a formal agreement." I took a slow breath, recalling the orchard that once filled that field, the soil my grandfather had tilled with love, the values my father instilled. Letting Miss Pierce walk away scot-free felt bitter, but if she truly reversed the damage, maybe that was the best outcome. We hammered out terms: immediate cessation of all building, removal of frames, releveling the soil, and a substantial sum for lost crops and emotional distress. The documents had to be filed by the end of the week. Miss Pierce signed, her pen trembling. She looked up, eyes burning with resentment. "Are you happy now?" she muttered. I met her gaze. "It's not about happiness," I said. "It's about justice. You had no right. And believe me, your legal troubles with the prosecutor aren't over." Over the next few weeks, demolition crews arrived, hauling off steel beams and half-poured concrete. The farmland was a mess of rubble and churned dirt, but at least it was being cleared. A state agricultural team came by to assess how best to rehabilitate the soil. My mother and I stood by the barn one dusk, watching silhouettes of backhoes ripping out townhouse foundations. "We'll have to rebuild, maybe replant the orchard in a different section," she sighed. I nodded, thinking of how many years it might take to fully restore the farm's productivity. Still, a sense of relief washed over me. We'd saved the farm from permanent ruin, and Ms. Pierce's hold on it was shattered. As expected, the criminal case advanced. The prosecutor indicted Ms. Pierce and a few unnamed associates for conspiracy to commit fraud. Todd, the county official, testified about bribes. Clearway Partners distanced themselves, claiming Ms. Pierce alone orchestrated the forged deed. The press had a field day with the scandal, dubbing it Townhouse Gate. Ms. Pierce, once so smug, found herself cornered by lawsuits, public outrage, and a tarnished reputation. Meanwhile, the farmland fiasco became a cautionary tale. You don't steal from the Linton family, and you certainly don't mess with the state land commissioner. In the months that followed, my mother and I poured ourselves into repairing the farm. We invited local volunteers to help replant sections of the orchard. The sense of community support was overwhelming. People brought saplings, seeds, and home-cooked meals, offering comfort. The local news ran a story highlighting our efforts to rebuild, praising the farmland's historical significance. I also worked from home more often, juggling my commissioner duties while overseeing the farmland restoration. Having faced the near loss of everything Grandpa built, I felt more motivated than ever to protect farmland statewide from unscrupulous developers. Eventually, Ms. Pierce pleaded guilty to lesser charges, paying fines, returning ill-gotten money, and facing a suspended sentence if she cooperated with further investigations. The half-finished townhouses? Gone, replaced by tilled earth, slowly regaining fertility. My mother recovered from the emotional toll, smiling more each day as new sprouts pushed through the soil. We'd lost a chunk of orchard heritage, but the land was ours again, and always would be. One warm summer evening, I stood on the porch, gazing at the horizon where Miss Pierce's ill-fated project once loomed. Now, it was a patch of freshly seeded farmland, waiting to bloom. The memory of seeing those monstrous frames for the first time still stirred anger, but I felt a deeper gratitude that justice prevailed. I couldn't help picturing Miss Pierce's face when I revealed my commissioner credentials. She'd never guessed I held that much power. By the time she realized it was too late, her scheme was doomed. I let out a long breath, thinking of my father's words. "Land has a memory, Graham. It knows who respects it and who merely wants to exploit it." In the end, Miss Pierce and her allies found nowhere to hide. Sometimes, local folks ask if I plan to keep working as state land commissioner. They wonder if politics might lure me to the city full-time. But I shake my head, telling them that my heart belongs in Dunford County, on the family farm. "I can do my job from here, too," I say with a grin, "and this land is safer if I'm around to watch it." They laugh, understanding that after all we've been through, the best caretaker of Willow Grove Farm is someone who loves it enough to fight tooth and nail. A few months later, the orchard's new rows were planted, sprigs of green punctuating the fields. My mother prepared a small gathering, inviting neighbors to celebrate the farmland's revival. We roasted corn, told stories about the old days, and I gave a short speech about preserving our agricultural heritage. "If you ever see an HOA sign sprouting on land that's not for sale," I joked, "call me first, and call me fast." Laughter rippled through the crowd, but we all knew it had a ring of truth. The fiasco Ms. Pierce caused was not an isolated case. Land grabs happen across the country, but at least here, for now, justice triumphed. Later that night, I stood alone by the orchard's edge, the moon illuminating freshly turned earth. I thought about how precariously close we came to losing everything. Another week or two and the townhouses might have been sold to unsuspecting families. Then reversing the damage would have been nearly impossible. Fate, or luck, combined with my position, gave us the edge we needed. But more than that, it was the unbreakable bond between my mother and me, the memory of Grandpa and Dad, the sense of stewardship that farmland demands. Miss Pierce never understood that. She saw farmland as empty real estate waiting to be monetized. She learned the hard way that some land cannot be stolen without a fight. I walked back to the farmhouse, mind awash in gratitude and a renewed sense of responsibility. Our farm was safe, the orchard was on the road to recovery, the HOA had slithered away, financially wrecked and legally compromised, and I still served as the state land commissioner, determined to protect other families from suffering a similar nightmare. The stars twinkled overhead, silent witnesses to the day's trials and triumphs. "Don't worry, Dad," I whispered, looking up at the dark sky. "We're here for the long haul. No one's kicking us off this land." A final wave of relief washed over me. I heard the wind rustling the newly planted saplings, and a faint grin spread across my face. The fight wasn't over. Life rarely ties up with a neat bow. But we'd won a major battle, reclaimed the farm, and proven to Ms. Pierce and her cronies that money and deception couldn't overthrow a legacy built on integrity and care for the earth. With a final glance across the moonlit fields, I stepped inside, heart steady, ready to face whatever came next. After all, I was the state land commissioner, and I intended to use every bit of that power to keep families like mine from ever losing their rightful heritage again.